Honourable Gadigal Eora Nation. Hello everyone, I'm so proud to be able to welcome you to this event and of course to this incredible gathering, the 8th gathering of Healing Our Spirit Worldwide. The theme is for our grandchildren's grandchildren. Each and every one of us, each and every one of you can relate to that in such an important and close way. Family for our peoples is so important, and creating our future for our grandchildren and their grandchildren is part of our responsibility if we want to be good ancestors. Unfortunately, I can't be there this evening. My parliamentary duties in Canberra mean that I need to be in Canberra, but I can tell you I'd much rather be there with you. What an amazing event. What an amazing gathering of people, First Nations people from around the world. It is so important that we come together in healing our spirit. It is healing our spirit in the spirit of truth-telling, in the spirit of supporting each other, in the spirit of love and sharing our survival, sharing our resilience, that this gathering will be a triumph. Can I first recognise that we are in Gadigal country, and of course we pay our respects to the Gadigal people. We recognise that the Gadigal have an incredibly important part in the Australian narrative. They were the first people to experience the brunt of British colonisation and all of the horrors that rained down on us for many, many decades. We remind ourselves that this is a wonderful nation. It's a nation with the oldest continuous surviving culture on planet Earth. That is the heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia, but it's also everyone's heritage as well. Can I pay tribute to the Healing Foundation and the University of Sydney for putting on our Healing Our Spirit conference worldwide. The theme, of course, is our grandchildren's grandchildren. What a significant and important theme that is for this conference. I want to recognise, as I said, the Healing Foundation, the University of Sydney. I know that June Oscar, our Social Justice Commissioner, is with us tonight. Hi June, how are you? Can I also recognise the extraordinary gathering of international guests and importantly also say hello to my brothers and sisters from Australia and to our fellow travellers. Healing Our Spirit has been going for many years. It is a significant gathering and it really goes to the heart of First Nations stories across the world. I know that we have brothers and sisters from many different nations, many first world countries with a colonial story like this one. And our stories are so similar. Our stories are so familiar to us. We have a shared story, a shared history and a shared understanding of what it means to be a First Nations person in this world today. It's a story of dispossession generally, a story of invasion, a story of loss of culture, of loss of language. It's a story of loss of children. It's a story of loss of relatives. And it is a story, in some instances, as a loss of identity with some of our brothers and sisters. But it's also a story of great survival. It's a story of resistance, it's a story of persistence, and it's a story of ingenuity. All of us collectively have these stories, and those stories feed into the wonderful mosaic of First Nations people's narrative across this world. Our story in Australia is like yours. And it is also, once again, a story of remarkable survival and resilience. In this country, we had the terrible situation of the English arriving and declaring under English law this whole nation belonging to the Crown. It ignored our story, it ignored our history, it ignored tens of thousands of generations. And the legal doctrine of terra nullius was used to conquer this land. And of course it wasn't until the early 90s when the High Court made the decision on Mabo that the legal doctrine of terra nullius was thrown out, and for the first time in Australian law, our existence, our survival, and our tens of generations of people living on this land harmoniously with nature, with the sea, with the rivers, with our culture, with our in-depth kinship structures, that was actually recognised. That was a remarkable day. I will never forget it. One of the fundamental pursuits we have been undertaking in Australia for many years now, in fact it's been in many ways my life work, is pursuing that craft of truth-telling. I know that you can all relate to this term, truth-telling. And in this country, in Australia, the truth-telling is very young, but it is happening. And unless a country owns its truth, and unless a country understands its truth, and unless a country can embrace the truth, then we will always be a diminished nation. I'm pleased to say that this idea of truth-telling is really taken hold in Australia. It has taken hold in a way through our school curriculum, through our parliaments, but most importantly, through the general population. Take, for example, the great act of truth-telling in this nation in 2008. On the 13th of February in 2008, the then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd made an apology on behalf of the Australian community to Aboriginal people about the stolen generations. For many decades in Australia, for many generations, there was what was called the forced removal of Aboriginal children from their families. I know this is a story that many people can relate to. That forced removal saw tens of thousands of Aboriginal children taken from their families across this country because of the simple fact that they are Aboriginal. Devastating effects on connection to country, connection to land, language and culture. And somehow we have survived that and put ourselves back together so that our culture, our stories, and our children, our grandchildren, and our grandchildren's grandchildren can have that truth, can have that story, and can continue to be strong in who they are as First Nations people. I am so proud that this conference is being held in Australia. Australia is a long way from anywhere, as many of you have, I no doubt, discovered. We are in the Southern Hemisphere. We look up to our skies and see the Milky Way and the Southern Cross, defining features for us as Australians. And it has only been recently that Aboriginal people can really feel that they can take their place as part of the Australian continuum. I didn't vote until I was 28 years old. I didn't vote because I didn't feel part of the Australian society. And I realised that part of that was my responsibility. That it was up to me to stand up as a First Nations person and take my place. I am now the member for Barton, which is an electorate in the southern suburbs of Sydney. I have the great honour of being the first First Nations woman to be elected into the House of Representatives. I have to say, I think I was a bit naive about it. I didn't quite realise what it would mean to the party that I represent, to the parliament that I'm part of, to the broader Australian community, and most importantly, to my own First Nations community. I am a Wiradjuri woman from southwestern New South Wales. Wiradjuri territory is a very large geographic part of New South Wales. Our land, our nation, embraces the Lachlan, the Macquarie and the Murrumbidgee River. I am part of the Murrumbidgee Wiradjuri. The Wiradjuri have an important place in the Australian narrative. We were the first inland nation to experience British colonisation, and it was devastating for Wiradjuri. The art of poisoning waterholes and flour was first used on the Wiradjuri. Across my country, there are many massacre sites. And what's important in telling this story for all of us is that intergenerational trauma. And what happened to my people back there in the early 1800s is a very important part of who I am and who Wiradjuri people are today. In 1823, in Wiradjuri territory, martial law was declared because Windradyne and his warriors had mounted such an incredible battle for their land, and the Wiradjuri wars were a real thing. Not many people know about the Wiradjuri wars, but in this truth-telling, more Australians are getting to understand that we did not let our land go easily, and that resistance has continued over and over generations. Of course, it's important also to understand these things when we think about this conference and what it stands for. Healing our spirit. What an important thing to happen for First Nations people across this blue planet. If our spirits are healed, we come to terms with so many things. If our spirits are healed, it heals the spirit of the nation. And our connectedness as First Nations people is part of healing that spirit. Healing spirit is understanding intergenerational trauma. Healing spirit is about rejoicing in what we are and who we are. Rejoicing in our story, having the truth told and the truth be understood by everyone. You are in the lands of many nations. Nations that have never ceded their sovereignty. Nations that have survived. Nations that have prospered. Nations that have been able to tell the truth. Nations that have held on to our identity and our stories for our grandchildren and their grandchildren. Have a wonderful gathering, and please enjoy the fact that you are in a country with the oldest continuous surviving culture on planet Earth. I'm so proud to be a First Nations woman. I'm proud to be Wiradjuri. I'm proud to be able to share these messages with you tonight. Have a wonderful evening and all the very best.
Maybe it was best to keep Linda to that. I think she spoke very well about what we're going to be talking about this evening. I would also like to acknowledge the land we're on tonight, the land of the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, emerging, and those we want to grow into the future. I'm very blessed to be able to be here tonight amongst a small group of people, which is great because this is a special space. This is a special space with some very special women who I'm so very lucky to know and have been able to connect to, and they've grown me, and I will get people to introduce themselves because I think it's so much better. But I just want to know you're in for a wonderful evening with these four amazing women. And I go back to that.
Hello everybody, I'd like to pay my respects to the elders and the ancestors of this beautiful land that we're on at the moment, and pay my respects to elders past and present. My name's Annie Hazel, and I'm the founder of an organisation here called Grandmothers Against Removals, and the film that you'll shortly be seeing is a documentary that was done where we speak about the removal of our babies and the impact. So I look forward to answering any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you all. My name's Melanie and I'm Owen Hayes' daughter. My story is a part of After the Apology. I am a mum that has gone through the struggle of having her children taken, but I have all my children back. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello everyone, my name is Christine Palmer. I'm a Wairau woman from Central Australia, part of the Aranda and Kaders tribe in Central Australia. Annie Hazel and Helen came up to Alice Springs and showed us this video that you're about to see. And because of strong grandmothers everywhere, we became a lot stronger when we'd seen that. And no, you can't stop us. I'd like to also pay respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. My name's Jeanette Mera. I don't do public speaking much, as you can probably hear. I'm a Kaurna Arabana Narungga woman from South Australia. I'm also Stolengen and a grandmother that looks after her granddaughter.
Okay. I think we might just have a little picture of why GMR and why it started. Annie Hazel. Annie Hazel looks a tiny little thing, but she's the most ferocious auntie you've ever met. And I've seen her have ministers quaking in their shoes. And she's remarkable.
I started Grandmothers Against Removals in 2014 in January. My daughter Helen had already had 3 children taken by the department. And she rang me this day and she said, "Mum, they're coming to take my baby." He was 15 months old. So I raced down there with my other daughter and another little grandson. And there were 8 or 9 police. And 4 dogs workers. My daughter wasn't there with her little boy. And I was trying to sort out what was going on. They told me that they only wanted to talk to Helen and cite my little boy. So I rang her and told her to bring him back. That's all I wanted. But I stood to see. My little boy being drove away in a car and trying to support my daughter. And I promised her we'd get him back. It was the hardest time to see him wave and thinking he was just going for a little ride. We didn't get him back straight away. But I kept my promise. exposed publicly. I told them docks workers and them flatfoots they weren't taking no more. And we had our first rally here in Sydney in 2014 on the 13th of February, which every year for my birthday I spend with extended family and friends and support, holding a government accountable for what they're still doing to our people and stealing our babies. My babies are home with their mum, but it's not without its problems. They don't understand. They think we didn't want it, we didn't fight for it. And it's very hard to reconnect. One of my grandsons, I feel like I'm a stranger to him. The relationship we had prior to his removal, no government, nobody can ever give me the relationship that they stole. Nobody could ever give his mum those nights she'd laid awake crying, wondering where he was, if he was safe. He doesn't never remember being in my home. I have 37 grandchildren. I'm a great-grandmother. The system deemed that I was unsuitable to look after Helen's children. I had to be assessed by a system that fails our people to be able to have them in my home. What the system also did was try to dictate to me, and I can tell you all now, I'm not really the person anybody should try to piss off intentionally. They tried to dictate to me when my daughter could see her children. They tried to tell me that she was not allowed to come to my home. I won't tell you what I said to her, but it wasn't very polite or pleasant. I gave this girl birth. I'll be her mum well after I die. My home is my daughter's home. Our time was like a stormy sea too. She felt I was trying to keep her babies away from her. But for the first time in 7 years, my daughter got to sleep with her children. She got to have meals, be able to play, be able to be their mum. Because I defied the department. When her babies were sick, she was there. She got to sleep with them. She got to tell them how much she loved them without being watched and dictated to. And I'm very proud of what I did. And I'm very proud of everybody that comes and speaks. I know how hard it is. I know it's difficult. And I know most of all, it's painful. I could have walked away when my grandbabies come home, but I won't, because there's a lot of little babies out there, regardless to their age, that are just as important as my babies, my blood. They too have a right to come home to their families until the day I die. I'll fight for them too.
Auntie Hazel's a great warrior, as is Helen, as is Auntie Christine. And we'll watch 20 minutes of the film and then we'll have a conversation post. We're not going to watch the whole film, we're just going to screen 20 minutes. No, you don't, and you're allowed to. I think people want to hear your story and it's so important. Can we start that film now? Here we go.
To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry.
The stolen generations, in many ways, could be argued, was the most destructive thing that had happened to Aboriginal people historically. I think it's almost impossible to explain what that meant in breaking down culture, in breaking down language, in breaking down family ties, in breaking down connection to country. And all of those things are absolutely essential in terms of Aboriginal identity. And this is what these policies were about.
We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these our fellow Australians.
What we originally felt, but this is great, it's recognition, it's acknowledgement that those government practices happened. This was very, very important for the people that affected, that someone acknowledges the hurt that they've experienced.
We apologise, especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, their communities and their country.
I was pleased that somebody actually then acknowledged that this had been done, and I was thinking it's about time and it was good. I had a little tear in my eye as well, actually.
For Aboriginal people that were actually still living, that had been removed under those families, it was finally an acknowledgement that this history was real, that their experience was real.
For the pain, suffering and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants and for their families left behind, we say sorry.
I respect the fact that he stood up there and said sorry, but sorry doesn't mean anything when it continues.
These people need to be made accountable. They are abducting our children.
I have 4 children, 4 boys. We've never had removals happen within my family within the past. You go to university, you work, you do jobs, you live your daily life and you move forward, but you don't think it's ever going to be the knock on your door. So when that knock came and I was informed, I got the phone call 3 o'clock in the morning because that was the time when my grandchildren were removed. My grandchildren were removed on the basis of flimsy evidence, not on the basis of anything concrete. You don't believe it,